Thank you, Senator Franken. And I want to begin by just thanking each of the members of the panel, thanking you for your service in the intelligence community, and thank you for your service looking at the difficult and important legal issues and privacy issues that surround this critical area. I think a great many Americans have concerns about the current state of NSA surveillance. I, for one, have concerns on two different fronts. I am concerned, on the one hand, that the federal government has not been effective enough monitoring and surveilling bad guys, that we have not succeeded in preventing what should have been preventable terrorist attacks. And at the same time, I'm concerned that the sweep of the surveillance has been far too broad with respect to law-abiding citizens. And I think a great many Americans would prefer to see that reversed. Far greater scrutiny on bad guys, people that we have reason to suspect may be planning a terrorist attack, and far more protection for law-abiding citizens who have committed no transgressions. And so I want to begin on the first piece on targeting bad guys, and I want to follow up with the question Senator Graham asked earlier concerning Major Hassan and his communications with al-Awlaki, a known terrorist leader. Despite all of our surveillance capabilities, despite having significant indications that Major Hassan was engaged in these communications, the federal government failed to prevent the horrific terrorist attack that claimed the life of 14 innocents at Fort Hood. And so the first question I'd like to ask the panel is, in your judgment, why is that? What was lacking that prevented us from acquiring the information and acting on it to prevent that act of terror?
Well, I guess I'd say that it is a very important question, and your general thought that to target through surveillance known bad guys, that is something that we did devote a great deal of attention to, and recommendation 15 is I'd say of great importance. It's gotten essentially no attention so far as I can tell, not even on Twitter has it gotten attention. And that recommendation is that we need to expand our authority to track known targets of counterterrorism when they first enter the United States. So that's a gap in our statutory structure, that when they come to the United States, they get protections immediately, so we can't track them. Whether that would apply to, in any way to the case you're describing, I don't think so, but it is an important gap. That one, I think, probably as a group, we'd need to get more into the details than we did.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Burrell, I would welcome your thoughts also on how we could have done better preventing that terrorist attack.
Senator, it's not something that we as a group looked at. That wasn't our mandate. I am familiar with the case, obviously. I'm a little constrained here because I don't know what's in the unclassified world and what's in the classified world. So maybe we could have a conversation afterward in closed session.
Okay. A follow-up question for the panel, if anyone would care to comment. The same is true with respect to the Sarnoff brothers, the Boston bombers, where in that instance we had intelligence from Russia that they were having communications with radical Islamic groups, and yet for whatever reason their radicalization continued. The government dropped the ball and they carried out yet another horrific terrorist attack. Do members of the panel have any views as to why our surveillance capability did not provide sufficient information to act upon to prevent that terrorist attack before it occurred?
So, Senator, I'll tell you, in that case, there weren't any communications between the United States and overseas. So there was no surveillance of those communications that would have provided any information that would have prevented the Boston bombings. And this is largely a case of domestic radicalization. And I think that's the best way to think about it.
Well, but as I understand it, the elder Tsarnaev brother, after traveling to Chechnya, after meeting with radical Islamic groups, came back and posted on public YouTube pages admonitions to jihad. And that certainly doesn't take extraordinary surveillance capability. It simply takes the government looking to what he's saying publicly and loudly before that terrorist attack is carried out.
Yeah, and I was making a different point, Senator. You're absolutely right, but I was making a different point about actual communications and the collection of those communications.
Well, and I think that underscores that my concern that the focus of the programs has been far too much on law-abiding citizens and far too little on people for whom we have significant reason to believe there may be a real danger of terrorism. And with respect to Major Hassan, with respect to the Tsarnaev brothers, I'm not sure there could have been too much surveillance based on the information we had to protect national security. Now, flipping to citizens at large, am I understanding correctly the conclusions that the Commission received, that in your judgment, the bulk metadata program has not to date prevented any specific terrorist attack? Is that an accurate understanding?
Yes, that's a fair understanding. We think that it's contributed some useful information, but could not say that any particular terrorist attack has been prevented because of the information learned from the metadata program.
Now, an additional recommendation, as I understand it from the Commission, is that the government itself stop collecting metadata, but that private companies, the phone companies that already have that data, preserve that data, and that searches be conducted only when there is specific cause to search, rather than, in a blanket sense, the government sweeping in every law-abiding citizen.
Precisely.
And is it the judgment of the Commission that if the data were kept in private hands of the phone companies that already possess the data legally, that would do nothing to undermine the efficacy of the program preventing potentially future attacks?
We believe that that way of handling the data can be done in a way that would not in any way undermine the efficacy of the program. On the other hand, we recognize in our report that that's speculative. We don't know that for a fact. And if in fact it turns out that there are inefficiencies that make it more difficult to use the data in an appropriate way, that the alternative is to have it held by a single private holder. Mm-hmm. And that would basically eliminate most of the inefficiencies.
Focusing also on the question of potentially overbroad surveillance. A couple of weeks ago, Senator Sanders wrote a letter to the NSA asking if the NSA, quote, has spied or is the NSA currently spying on members of Congress or other American elected officials? And the NSA's response to that was members of Congress have the same privacy protections as all U.S. persons, which certainly suggests the answer to that question is in the affirmative. Now, as I understand it, each of you were granted security clearances and the ability to see classified information in court opinions. And so the question I would ask this panel is, are you aware, has the NSA ever done surveillance on members of Congress or other elected American officials?
We are not aware of any such. And one of the things we learned in our review is that there's no targeting by the NSA of people because of their political views or their religious convictions or their political party. So in terms of concretely some details, we may not have precise questions that every one of which we have off the top of the mind answers to, but politics, religion, political views, that's not what they're interested in.
Just one small thing. We're talking about in recent years. We're not talking about back in the 60s and 70s when there was a different history about intelligence agencies doing things that got exposed.
No, I mean in current years. Although I do want to clarify, Professor Sunstein, one thing you said about religious views. I assume you would agree that a commitment to jihad would not qualify as a religious view and indeed would be a political position and embrace of violence that merits very close scrutiny to prevent that violence from being carried out.
Yes, if there's a reason to believe the person is threatening to the United States, that would not fall within protected religious belief.
A follow-up question related to the question about members of Congress: is any member of the panel aware whether the NSA has spied or is spying on the judiciary, or in particular members of the Supreme Court?
We have no information to that effect and would not anticipate that.
Very good. Well, I want to thank each of you for being here. The remainder of the committee is off voting, and so with that, we'll take a 5-minute recess, and then I expect my colleagues will return, and the hearing will commence again then. Thank you.